collaboration with Koilan Bhuya, Indrani Loskar, Maria Remondage, and Pradipta Borgohain. Without further ado, may I now request Sir Bipul Deuri to kindly come on to the dais and take his seat. Bipul Deuri is a translator who has translated 9 books into Assamese so far. He won the Sahitya Akademi Translation Award last year for translating Amish Tripathi's The Immortals of Meluha. He also won Amulya Kumar Chakraborty Translation Award for Mark San's River Dog. His articles and translated short stories have been published in various newspapers and periodicals. We are honored to have you here, sir. May I now request Madam Indrani Laskar to come on to the dais and take her seat. Madam is a civil servant, Government of India. She is also an author, translator, poet, and short story writer. Her translations into Assamese include Franz Kafka's Diaries and Letter to His Father, Jhumpa Lahiri's Lowland, Amitav Ghosh's Gun Island and Tadolines, and Dalai Lama's autobiography, My Land and My People. Rong Birong Hilalor Hadhu is her collection of stories for children. Jibon Bisitra and Kitab.com are 2 books of collected articles written by her on art, literature, culture. Inner Space and Catherine Diary are 2 collections of translated short stories from Assamese to English. She has also translated Cotton College, the first campus novel of India, from Assamese to English. She has 2 books translated from Bengali to Assamese. Parallel Lines is her collection of English poems. We are honored to have you here, ma'am. May I now request Madam Maria Remondage to come on to the dais and take her seat. Madam Remondage is a Galician language translator, interpreter, writer, and activist. She obtained her PhD in translation and interpretation and is a renowned feminist translator who actively works to create a critical understanding of how colonial patriarchal structures can be subverted. As a writer, Remondage has touched upon all genres, although she is mainly known as a novelist. Her work has been recognized with numerous awards in Galicia, and she is seen as one of the most important contemporary writers of her generation. Her latest works include Furia in 2023, which received the Premier Jules Verne for YA Literature in 2023, a novel about boxing and grief, and the science fiction trilogy Trilogia dos Seres Completos, where she explores issues of gender and ecology through the unusual gaze of trees. Her works have been translated into Italian, French, Spanish, Catalan, and Tamil. She has lectured in numerous universities all over the world, mainly focusing on topics related to translation, language hegemony, feminist, LGBTQ issues, and creative writing. She has a long-standing relationship with feminist organizations and artists in Tamil Nadu and has been visiting South India since 1994. We are extremely honored to have you here, ma'am. Now, may I request Sir Pradipta Borgohain to kindly come on to the dais and take his seat. Sir is a teacher of English, an author, and a translator. He won the Katha Award for Best Translation in Assamese in 1997. His translation, The Collected Works of Human Buragohain, was longlisted for Atagalata Award in 2017. He has authored the books Rainbow Thoughts and Victorian Literature and co-authored Scrolls of Strife, The Endless History of the Nagas. He has also written a novel in Assamese, Amerikak Bisari, which was reprinted recently. He has contributed to the volume Alice in the World of Wonderlands, the translations of Lewis Carroll's masterpiece. Most recently, his translations have appeared in the greatest Assamese stories ever told. He has been a regular columnist in leading newspapers in Assam. He teaches English in Guwahati University. We are honored to have you here. Now, may I request Sir Koilan Bhuiyan to come on to the dais and have a seat. Koilan Bhuiyan is a poet, short story writer, and translator, a professor of physics in Dibrugarh University. He regularly writes popular science articles for leading Assamese magazines. He has written a biography of Nicholas Copernicus in Assamese. His two poetry collections are Goru Aru Ononyo Kobita and The Sky Over the Wind. He has translated Ismat Chuktai's Kagaji Hai Perahan, Yuval Noah Harari's Sapiens, and Amartya Sen's Home in the World into Assamese. He has edited several books and is currently a joint editor of bilingual online magazine Poetry Without Fear. Thank you, sir, for having us. Now, may I take a moment to introduce our rapporteurs, Mrinmoy Bora and Nikita Sharma from the Department of Political Science. It is a privilege to welcome you all to this enlightening session on Onubad, the art of translation. This session will be moderated by Sir Bipul Deuri. May I now request our Bipul Deuri, sir, to kindly take over this session.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. I welcome you all to this 44th session of Dibrugarh University International Literary Festival. Onubad, this is translation. Today, this session is on translation, and we have four very esteemed and distinguished authors and translator here with us as a panelist, and we are going to know about the translation and what is translation actually. First, I would like to begin with Maria Remondes. She is from a very far off away. She is from Spain, and most of us before that we are not very much familiar with the Galician literature or language. So first of all, we want to know about what is the tradition, then about your language and the history of your language. So, ma'am, please.
Hello. Good afternoon, and thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this conversation on translation. Although I am an author, I was first published as a translator, and I always say that there are many authors, but the work of the translator, at least in our languages that are non-hegemonic, is so important because it helps us connect. So I always give a lot of value to my work as a translator. And also as a scholar who has studied decolonial translation, it is a great pleasure for me to be in a place where there is such a rich tradition in metaphors, in ways of thinking about relations that are outside of the Western, very biblical approach to the author and the translation. And it's also a pleasure to be with translators I have read and whose work has contributed to my own understanding of literature and to accessing the writings of women in Southeast Asia. So thank you very much. I am very happy to be the exotic one here because coming from the West is usually the other way around. So I'm very happy that I am the strange element in this panel. And I will just give a very simplified and very short history of the Galician language and translation within it. So Galician is a language spoken northwest of Spain, of the Iberian Peninsula actually. And Galician and Portuguese were the same language until the 14th century. It's a Latin-based language. And the languages were separated, but they're still quite close. And Galician is interesting because it was not a written language for 4 centuries. So due to political strife, the Galician nobles sided with the wrong side of the history of what would later become Spain. And they were all expelled, and the clergy too. So Galician became the language of peasants and of people who didn't have access to education. So for 4 centuries, as I was saying, since the 14th century until the 18th, 19th century, Galician was not written. Then at the beginning, during the 19th century, was again used as a literary language, and I always emphasize that the first person to ever write in Galician again, unaware of the fact that Galician had been a very important language in the Middle Ages, was a woman. Her name is Rosalía de Castro, and she's an amazing poet, an amazing thinker, a feminist. I won't say before the time, because she was really a feminist, with a very deep intersectional thinking, we would say nowadays, in terms of class and ecology, etc. And translation after that, the literature started developing. We didn't have a standard until 1984, because we had a coup d'etat and a civil war and a dictatorship already in the 20th century. So we've had, in the previous panel, when I was hearing the history of Konkani, and I know many of our languages have gone through struggles like those, and we need to understand that to understand what translation means also. So for Galician, as I said, we didn't have a standard until the 20th century, until the 1980s. But translation started at the beginning of the 20th century, and the Galician nationalist movement was very keen on connecting. I'm a bit critical because the connection was only within Europe. So they were very interested in the Irish, liberation movement and the Irish nationalist movement. So they translated some of the Irish English language writers of the time. And since the 1980s, the translation was seen as a means to revive the language and the literature. So we initially decided to translate the classics. Me as a decolonial feminist translator have also many thoughts about that and who the classics are. But that was the initial trend. And now that we have a master's degree and a university that teaches translation into Galician, I think that the situation is a bit more diverse, and maybe we can talk about that later. I don't want to take up so much time, but this is just as some context for you to understand where I come from and what my language, what the situation of the language has been.
So, Maria, you also PhD in translation. So, what was your topic of the translation?
Yes, as I was saying, I come from a country in Europe. They call us stateless nations. We are a nation without a state to back us. And I always speak about non-hegemonic languages because hegemony has to do with position. And there are some languages that are hegemonic in one place and non-hegemonic in another place. So when we come from a non-hegemonic language background, I think that in itself triggers an interest in power and translation. So my dissertation was about ideology in translation from a decolonial and feminist perspective. And some of the things that I analyzed, for example, was precisely what I was mentioning before, how translation studies, they're called international, but I call them Western, because I think that's what they end up being, have only considered certain traditions. Also, the flows of translation. It's interesting to see, especially in a country such as India that has so many languages, it's interesting to see how translations flow in some directions and not in others. And how, for example, when I was mentioning the classics being translated into Galician, those same classics are the ones that exclude Galician from being translated. So it's a bit of a contradiction. And in my practice, I always try to bring writers from other parts of the world that are not necessarily the West, who write in other languages, and especially women and queer people who are writing, because I think that's the way to also create a more diversified and biodiverse literary system in Galician. So that's part of the work, and then of course the whole body of feminist translation studies that help us analyze, the inequalities between the author and the translator, how the translator has been portrayed as female. But again, both things have to go together, because if we look at decolonial translation, we also see how in many cases the author, and I have studied cases in Galician too, the male white author thinks that he's superior to the female non-white author. And there are some interventions that are really interesting to see how patriarchal and colonial structures work through translation. I don't think translation is always a bridge. It can be a very violent act, and we've seen that in colonization, how translation has also contributed to it. So it's a wide area that helps us understand everything through the lens of power relationships. And as I always say, Galicia is a very interesting place to be, because we have a hinged position. So we're both non-hegemonic, but we're still a Western, mainly white nation. So we have to also analyze how we relate to others through translation.
Now I move to Pradipta Bargohain. Pradipta Bargohain is with us today. So the 21st century is known as the age of translation. The whole over the world of translators are busy with the translation, and they are building bridges between the different cultures and different languages, and then transfer their thoughts and their philosophy to one language to another language. Nowadays we are talking of this politics in translation. So I want to know a few words about the politics of translation. I think that Pradipta Bargohain will throw some lights on this particular subject.
Okay, thank you. Well, yes, politics is everywhere. If politics is everywhere, I think that was one of the first claims of the feminists, that politics is not just in the in the voting arena or something, or taking over of power in a direct way, but politics is everywhere. So yes, there is politics in translation, and it is a huge subject. So I'll only touch on a few things. First of all, of course, translation, if I may say so, if I can make such a big claim on behalf of translation, it's the central metaphor of the world. And those who have studied English literature, who can forget that immortal line from Midsummer's Night's Dream? One character saying to Bottom, thou art translated. He becomes an ass. Human being has this head of a donkey. So yes, even human beings can be translated. Things can be translated. Well, if you think, an entire culture can be translated. So, and in fact, this is the vein in which one of the most influential, powerful voices of world literature, Salman Rushdie, he frequently referred to himself as a translated human being. So he was talking about migration, the experience of being a migrant who is translated. So if you think of translation and some other allied activities, transfer, dislocation, participation in more than one culture, then you can see already the politics of it, because politics is intertwined with culture and social life, with religion. And if we start with religion, I think we can think back to the times of, not that I know a great deal about it, Germany, Martin Luther, who started translating the Bible from the original Latin into German. And then that was not simply a kind of neutral act. He wanted, this was German nationalism. The growth of the German language was made possible by the translations of Luther. Okay, the hegemony of Latin, the hegemony of the so-called classical languages, the rise of the vernaculars. And the great Krishnakanta Hendik, who was Vice Chancellor of Ghar Auditorium University, internationally renowned writer. He has this essay called Onubator Kotha. Then he was pointing to the resurrection of local languages through translation, and he talked about Serbian nationalism, which was enabled by translation. And this is something that one can go on and on. And I think I agree with Maria also that translation, only in the very basic and naive sense, can be seen as a bridge between cultures. Yes, that is all right, fine. But then, if you look at the motives, the compulsions behind translation, for instance, William Jones, the British who colonized, he also referred to colonialism. When they colonized India, translation was one of their stratagems. It was a tool. They decided what should be translated, both ways. And William Jones, for instance, talked about the glorious past of India. So certain kinds of ancient texts can be translated. But at the same time, he pointed out that the present past of India is debased. India has fallen. So they put people the Indians in their places. They were the ones who were deciding what kinds of text should be translated. And so there has always been politics in translation, and in a country like India, certain languages get primacy. Assamese, of late, of course, it's nice to see that their voices emerging. People are writing in English directly, but also texts by certain writers are getting translated, but not all writers. So unless there is a lot of networking and all that, many voices remain unheard. So that is also politics, but maybe we can again take up these issues. We can go to the address.
Thank you. We just mentioned about the Krishnakanta Handike. He was the first person to translate Naikhat Charitram to English. Next, I come to Indrani Laskar. She has done a very good job and a wonderful translation from English to Assamese. Right from the Kafka to Jhumpa Lahiri's Lowland, then Cotton College, she translated from Assamese to English, and her latest two translated novels are Amitabh Ghosh, Ghar Island, and Shadow Lines. I have gone through the Ghar Island. That was a very wonderful book and nice book on climate changes, then human trafficking, and global warming. So what is your experience when you are translating this book, and why you prefer to translate that book particularly?
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. At the outset, I'd like to thank everyone for inviting me out here. And I simply rushed down here early in the morning, and I'm glad that thank you very much, Bipulda, for giving me the question, because I was scared, again, I'll have to give a speech like I do every day, and from my job, from the midst of the file, and again coming to the books and all, it's a difficult transition. But anyway, as you were asking about Amitav Ghosh, actually I should begin that I always pick up the books that I translate randomly. And I didn't actually start as a translator, my journey. I studied in a convent school, so Assamese was not a language I was familiar with. It was just like I was writing articles in Assamese and all. Then there was one book which really influenced me when I was in school. That is the Metamorphosis by Ghar Auditorium. And so what happened was that I translated a few of the diary, which was selected diaries and which got translated in Amarohom. And that was a bold step for me. And I'm always very grateful, I should say. And I'm sure Pradipta Da will also like to know about it. It was actually much respected who encouraged me that at least you can do something in translation, for which I'm always grateful for this step. And then Amitav Ghosh I took up is because, as Dada had always said, climate change is something which is very close to my heart.
And even as a bureaucrat, I had been working on climate change, and I have given it as one of the trust areas. And once I read the book, The Great Derangement, and then I was also reading The Hungry Tide. So it was just, you start getting interest in one subject, and then you start picking up this book and that book. And then when you really like it, the Ghana Island, I liked, when I read The Hungry Tide, then I thought, Ghana Island is something, it's just, I was getting so much involved into it. And I liked the story, the way he had weaved the story of of Bon Bibi and, the folk tales and everything. And it had gotten somehow, like when you read the book, it's something, it transports you to some other world. So I said, why not get it translated into Assamese so that how I love the book, it should also reach other people also. That is how I took up the Ghana Island. And of course, Dada, if you ask me about the other books also, and His Holiness I took up because of my association with Buddhism, which I've been following for last 20 years. So my subject was just randomly whatever I'm passionate about, I just pick it up. As Murakami had said, how he translated Great Gatsby, because he was planning, and then he decided that he should get it translated. So it's also, I'm not claiming that I'm as great as Murakami, but I think it happens with every translator. I'm sure you have also translated Amitav Ghosh. You must have also gone through that same experience, especially Dada had done a wonderful job with Glass Palace. And that was also, especially when I think, the way was traveling from Myanmar to Ratnagiri, that entire, this was something which keeps on haunting me, the whole journey, And then I went to Ratnagiri also, watch it. So it's something, that every book that you pick up is something that is close to heart. And I had taken another book called Shadows also. This is because partition is one subject that has always touched so many people. Especially, I translated some works of Sadat Hassan Manto where, partition, because in Assam we haven't felt so much the effects of partition. But two states have really faced the partition, that is Bengal and Punjab. And partition, because, the division that we create between the countries are just, they are just shadow lines. It's for politics that we do it. They are shadow lines. And the way he had unfolded the story, it was something which really touched me. So that is the reason why I picked up the books. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Indrani. Now I move to Kalyan Bhuya. So you are translating the one of the... So you please share your experiences in translating, and when you find any difficulties in translating, any hurdles in transferring from one language to another language. You have done a very good job and a very wonderful translation, that is Yuval Noah Harari's *Sapiens*. There's a most talked book at the moment.
Thank you very much. I welcome you all as a part of the hosting institution, because I belong here. Regarding the experience, I actually started late because I am a student of physics. I teach physics and do research in physics. So I was very late in starting my translation work. And my schooling has been, of course, in Assamese medium school. So most of the times when we got time to read books, the books were mostly in Assamese. So we did not have, particularly myself, I did not have experience of reading books in other languages. But I have been fortunate enough when I joined here. I've been fortunate enough to have many faculty members who are well conversant with the internet, means the literature, international literature. So they have guided me to various very well-known books, like you have mentioned the *Sapiens*, then Kagazi Hai Pairehan by Ismat Suktai. So I started translating both the books. I have gone through both the books, and I was actually mesmerized by the English translation of Kagoji Hai Pairahan. You'd like to know that the English translation was done by another Assamese from Jamia Millia Islamia. So I contacted him and took permission from the author to give the permission to translate the book. So the Ismat Suktai was a Muslim woman of pre-independence era. She was contemporary to Sadat Hassan Montu. And it was very mesmerizing for me to learn that a Muslim woman with such a liberal mind could have been there in India at that time, pre-independence era. And it was very challenging for me because I was born as a Hindu. Of course, I do not believe in any religion now as a student of physics, but my bringing up was with Hindu rituals. So basically, you cannot come out of your upbringing. So I have been a Hindu by birth, but also a person, because my gender is male. So being a male, it was very difficult to translate a culture and the thinking, the feelings of a woman from a very different era, because I do not belong to that era. So there was a great cultural difference, and also the gender difference was there. So I had found many difficulties in translating Ismat Suktai's life in words. But then I was actually translating two books parallelly, even though Ismat Suktai's book came out earlier. Sapiens was also doing at the same time. So because getting the permission from Yuval Noah Harari was very difficult. And he actually did not know about Assamese very well. So he thought that it is a large language, so he charged a huge amount of money for that. But when we contacted him, that he's very professional. I should mention that because when we did the cover of the Assamese edition of Sapiens, he actually personally took interest in designing the cover. It is his design in the Assamese version also. So he is very professional. So when we told him that the Assamese is spoken by a very small number of people in India, so he drastically reduced the search. So that's why it took a lot of time during the communication, because you have to take permission from the publisher also. So it took a lot of time. So it came out later, 1 year later, and Ismat Suktai's. But the translating Sapiens was a great learning experience for me, because if you look at the book, the perspectives into the history of humankind, there are several perspectives from science point of view, from cultural point of view, politics, then economics. It is a multidisciplinary subject. You must say that, because you need to know physics, chemistry, then politics, and also some economics. And I was very astonished to have the first reading of the book, and I was wondering how a person can write such a book, only single person. But later on, I knew that he has a lot of groups who are looking into different perspectives of the humankind, history of the humankind. But the problems we faced during the translation was there is a dearth of words in technical words, basically. If you look at technical language, there is a dearth of words in Assamese. So I have always been advocating the assimilation of other words from other languages into Assamese. And I have been actually in a conversation with Nogen Soikas, I have requested him to emphasize on that we should not be very, what we say is, skeptical about assimilating words from other languages. We should be always liberal as far as possible. So, yeah.
Elster Reid, he was a famous translator who translated most of the Pablo Neruda's Spanish poem from Spanish to English. So he said in his piece, The translation is a mysterious alchemy. Some poems survive it to become poems in another language, but others refuse to live in any language but their own, in which case the translator can manage no more than a reproduction or effigy of the original. That was quote from the Elster Reid, who was translated Pablo Neruda's, then Lorca's. They are translated into the English. So what do you think? My question is open to all the panelists, that anything lost in translation, what is your opinion on that? Yes, Maria.
I always say that everything is gained in translation. I really hate this concept that things get lost in translation. Translation is a transformation, it's an intervention, it's a connection also between the translator and the cultures involved and the texts involved. And I always think that translation is a gain for the readers and even for the translator. And actually, that's one of the reasons that why I hate translating my own works, because I think that the authors are the ones who have the most limited view of the writing. When somebody else reads your book, they establish different connections to different things, and that's always really enriching. So I think that this idea of lost in translation is also something very Western that comes from the whole biblical tradition of the word that cannot be touched. So we have to move away. I'm very happy, as I said at the beginning, that I know the traditions of India in translation are completely different. And I think that they're way healthier and far more realistic. They're much connected to the work that we do than the Western framework for translation. For me, everything is gained in translation.
Actually, not anything is lost in translation. I agree with Maria. In fact, Rabasa, who was translating Marcuse, was telling that, when you are translating, you have to play the two roles. You are both the Shakespeare and also the Hamlet. That is, you are also stepping into the original author and also the character. And there are certain difficulties. For example, I was translating Cotton College. As he has mentioned, it was set in the 60s. So it was very difficult. There was some cultural differences were there since the novel was in the 60s. Nowadays, you don't find the girls clad in mekhla chadar or having singra. They will rather wear, it's a different kind of thing than we are talking about the four annas and all. I was very much tempted, like whether the people will be able to relate to what I had been translating, because it's of another era. That is also there. And secondly is that when I was translating His Holiness book, My Land, My People, because it was in a different, again, history, because it happened in the 50s and the 60s, someone from not even from our, we are also becoming old also, maybe the next generation. It's difficult for them, who is His Holiness or the history of China and Tibet and this kind of thing. So there also, I was just wondering whether I'll be able to reach out to people or not. And so, as it has been said, the translation actually is a bridge between culture, between history, and it's very, because particularly His Holiness, the book that I have translated, it's very nice. I'll tell you a very short story. I mean, I was like, since what happened was that this is how translation actually affects the lives of people. Just recently, I met a lady. She came to me and she said, "You have translated My Land, My People." I said, "Yes." Then she started telling me of her neighbor. He was a dying person. He's on the deathbed. Every day she takes out the My Land, My People, the Assamese translation that I had made, and she reads out to that person. The person is suffering from cancer and he's on his last stage. He says that it gives him inspiration to live another day because he reads the life of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. I was so touched, not because I had done a great job or something like that, but I was touched, the message of kindness and compassion that His Holiness has been preaching, and the entire story, how we will feel if we are thrown out of our own home. And this great soul had been thrown out from his own country, and yet his message is there, and it's touching people, that the small fry that I'm able to carry across his message and touching someone who is at his deathbed, that is how, translation also works. Like unknowingly, translation also, as she had said, it bridges not only culture, it sometimes bridges hearts also.
Yes. Thank you.
So you want to say something on Pradipta?
Well, it depends how you look at it, gain, loss, exchange, circulation. There is a certain vocabulary, a very commercial vocabulary regarding translation. So that will always be there. Again, the issue becomes politicized. But as I said, how you look at it, if you think of the exact way in which something is translated, if you're focusing on the process of, let's say, an individual act of translation, something may be lost. And I tell my students when I teach them biography, life writing, that the impossible art of biography, because nobody can write an exact biography of another person. If I write a biography of Bipul Deuri, how can I write every single detail of his life? I'm not here with him every moment. So it's an impossible art. Even if I write about myself, even then I can't write because I don't know myself completely. I think I know. So I think the same thing can be applied to translation. There can never be an exact equivalence between two languages because the two languages also belong to two different cultures. People once talked about, not two different languages, but the English language and how one English novel, I forget the name, it was a hit in England. But in America, it was a failure. It bombed because the Americans could not appreciate many of the, little customs and, the whatever foibles, likings. So same language, but different cultures. So something may have been lost. And then also, if you think about, for instance, I had tried to translate I did translate one of my mother's novels. And things were lost because I realized that that's a big novel, so I have to leave out things, right? I cannot include everything. I had to prune it, I had to delete, excise. So in that sense, obviously there is a loss because many things remained uncommunicated to the reader who doesn't know Assamese. So yes, but if you, again, there is a debate about what is the ideal kind of translation. So as long as there is a debate about the ideal kind of translation, we will keep on talking about gaining or losing. There is one view, one critic was pointing out that, there is a kind of translation which leaves the writer in peace. Okay, the writer is left in peace. That is to say, that that translator does not temper with the writing style of the original author. So the translation then becomes stiff and difficult because he's trying to approximate as much as possible to the writing, the culture of the writer. So and in fact, one of the great translation theorists, Lawrence Venuti, says that a translation should not seem like a translator. It should not seem natural. There should be a translatedness. It should appear that foreignness should be there. But then there is another view that, leave the reader in peace. Okay, temper, violate the author's sovereignty or whatever, and then because you make things easy for the reader. So it all depends how you look at it. But by and large, I agree with you that there cannot be loss on the whole. There is a gain because otherwise, it's a Tower of Babel when God decided to divide us up by, making us speak so many different languages. Otherwise, I go to a place like, I had made just one trip to Europe as a family. I had an easy time in Norway, okay, because, and I had gone to Latvia first and then I went to Norway. Latvia, I had a tough time. Because nobody knew, not nobody, but most people did not know English. But Norwegians know they speak very good English. One American said that they speak better English than Americans. Anyway, so English is a bridge. Translation is also a bridge in that sense. But this gain and loss, again, the great German thinker Walter Benjamin said that both the translator and the original don't look at them as separate. They are all part of the same, they're fragments of some one great whole. We are all, we all belong to one kind of community of thinking. So translation does bring people together, but it depends on the context. It can be used violently, it can be used to subjugate. So I think that thing about loss and gain is a very debatable issue.
Pradipta is just mentioned about the Babel's Tower. That was actually the classical interpretation and the homogeneity of the cultural and the etiology and the cradle of this classical interpretation. So after that, you want to say something?
I'd like to share some experience. Currently I am actually trying to translate Red Samadhi by Gitanjali Sri. It has been almost 3 years I have started translating that book, but it is almost 75% done. But adding to what you had said, I agree with Gorgone sir that sometimes something may be lost in translation. I would like to draw your attention to certain aspects of translation, like translating poetic language is very difficult, which I have found in Red Samadhi. Red Samadhi is a very written in a poetic language. So there are certain words which are available only in Hindi. You cannot translate it into Assamese. Like there is a line, the protagonist actually discovers an idol of Buddha, an idol of Buddha in excavation. Okay, and they have put the idol in altar to worship it. So she writes in a single language that Khudai se Khudai tak. Both the words are same, Khudai and Khudai. Khudai se Khudai tak. Basically, it says that from excavation to the altar, that it means one is altar, one Khudai is altar, one Khudai is excavation. So in Assamese, you cannot have any equivalence to that. There is a very, and another is she has written something about lost innocence or something like that. It is Buddh Gaya se Buddh Gaya se Buddh Gaya to Gaya bhi Gaya. So how can you translate it? Because this is in a very rhythmic language, in a very poetic language. So I have been finding it very difficult to translate Red Samadhi. It is taking a lot of time because, again, you have to assimilate whole of the context, whole of the situation the novel is trying to depict. So unless you assimilate it into yourself, then you cannot translate into Assamese. That is one of the problems. So maybe it depends on the book you are trying to translate. Something may be lost in translation, so which you cannot actually translate. Thank you.
Thank you, Kalyan. One of the Bangladesh famous poet, which is the eminent poet Samsur Rahman, he said once that reading poem in translation is like kissing a girl on a calendar.
So I will write that down for the sexist metaphors of translation and objectifying women when speaking about translation. That's a new example that I have just collected here. Thank you. But if you allow me now that I have the microphone, I wanted to go back to this discussion that we were having that is so interesting, because I think that the idea of something getting lost in the sense of not having an equivalent for it or not having the exact word for it is also a very political thing. And I can share my experience translating Salma, who's here in the festival, the Tamil poet and novelist, into Galician, and how, and I will mention another Tamil writer who was here last year, Ambai, how the translation, when it involves two cultures that are not on an equal footing, is highly political. And what gets lost and how we make people uncomfortable is also a way of translating from a political perspective. So many times when I'm translating women from other parts of the world into Galician, I'm aware that the Galician reader is a Western reader. So I try to make those readers uncomfortable. As I was saying, Ambai has a very interesting article in which she explains how when her texts get translated into English is like kissing a frog and turning it into a prince, because everybody thinks that the translation is more important than what she wrote because of the imbalance in the languages. But she also says in that same article that many times the works of authors outside the West are turned into footnotes. And she explains how when she was reading in Tamil the translations of the Russians or all these works that are translated into Tamil, they never got footnotes. She never knew what champagne was and not even how to pronounce it. And she still read. She lived through that uncomfort. And I think that's one of the features of non-hegemonic subjects, that we are constantly made uncomfortable by the hegemonic structures. So when I translate, I try to turn that around, and I try to make the Western readers be uncomfortable with the names, with not having explanations about what amma is or tangachi or whatever it may be. You have to understand it's a family relation. I don't have to give more explanation to you. So that, in a way, is a political understanding of this whole concept of what we translate and how and what do we do with, even with poetry. Translation is a challenge. I'm also a boxer, so I love a challenge. And I love it when texts are difficult to translate, when I have to use my imagination and my creativity and also access all the resources that my language has. So that's why I think one of the problems that we sometimes have, especially in our languages, is that we need to have a good knowledge of our mother tongue. And that knowledge, when languages get lost and when we have less and less speakers, we also lose the richness that the language has and that we translators need to face the challenges of a translation.
Please.
Did you just say you're a boxer? Yeah. Then henceforth, I'll choose my words very carefully. And I completely support you when you say that there is a sexist dimension to language. In fact, there are theorists who say that we use the use of words like fidelity. Okay, then the original is the male, and the translation is the derivative and all that. And also, if you going beyond metaphors, I think if you can see the reality, I suppose. The translations that have been done, translators have usually been based, but that is, of course, now changing. But yes, I suppose the gender aspect is very much there. But otherwise, if you talk of laws and all that, one thing I think, again, I support you when you say that you let the original words be. I think if I read something, I come across a word like mama, you have not given a footnote, you have not annotated. I read a few pages, I can figure out, who is a mama. You can, after some time, you can figure out for yourself. So there used to be a practice that be glossaries and, footnotes. More and more, you read something like Sacred Games by Vikram Chandra. You'll be amazed how he, for instance, all the profanities that, the Hindi language in particular, if you want to learn profanities, you should read Vikram Chandra's Sacred Games. You learn them all. No explanation, but of course, we are actually, none of us is innocent. We know those things. But he has not bothered to, translate or offer footnotes. So you figure out, I was, that book that was mentioned, the project in which I took part, Alice in a World of Wonderlands. It's a project that brought together translations from all over the world. And there was one political sort of information that the Belarusian translator of Alice, he said that for a long time there was no Alice translation. Alice in Wonderland is the most translated work in with the history of the world, probably. But for a long time, there was no translation of Belarus because, the Iron Curtain, they did not like the bourgeois culture to come in. Anyway, so that is the political aspect. But I was back translating. That is what it required. A commentary and a back translation of Probina Hoikia's book, Ozan Dekhot Alice. That is how she translated Alice in Wonderland. Then there is an Assamese word, an Ahomia word called buddhi. How do you translate that word buddhi? I don't think there is any exact, wheat, yes, but not exact. So those things sometimes pose a challenge, and but then again, as I said, after some time, she used the word buddhi, and I was back translating. I don't recall what I think it was different actually in English. So, but anyway, I think the reader will figure out after some time.
If I'm permitted, I'll also say something about the words. It has to be, translation has to be a balance. Like when you translate, it should feel like one is reading the original. At the same time, it should have the touch of that culture. And sometimes, when it talks about Amma or this kind of thing, what I prefer is keeping those words in that story. And sometimes it leads to funny confusion also. Like I was translating, as you were talking about Tamil literature, I'm translating a short story, Tamil short story. And what happens in Tamil Nadu, they have got a custom. Like when a person dies, he is, decorated and all. He is placed, he is made to sit, and he is taken around the village. And then I was not being able to, one word was creating a lot of confusion to me. I thought, was it pillar? I was thinking it was pillar. Then after one day, I was thinking about it, what could be that word? Then I know it means Lord Ganesha. Then it made my whole thing different. I mean, he was all decked up and he really looked like Lord Ganesha. But because when I was thinking he's a pillar kind of thing, then it doesn't make any sense. So sometimes even one word makes lots of difference.
Thank you. We don't have much time. Then now I want to, our esteemed participant here, you can ask questions. Our panelists are here. You can have an interactive session with them. Just for another 10 minutes, I think. Yes.
Thank you, sir. We are very pleased to listen from the esteemed panelists, and my own view or feelings about translation I want to convey to you. That is, for example, Napoleon Bonaparte, which was translated by Satyen Borkotaki. It was such a translation that we were very much happy to read it. Satyen Borkotaki, he used Ohomia, Jotwa Thas, Phokara Jojana, etc. in their translation in 3 parts. But on the other hand, when we read Pitaputra in English translation, I was disappointed because it was like an abridged version. It was shortened and many things were not included. Therefore, here we have found 2 aspects that anything in translation, it is always a gain, and on the other hand, in some translations, we have something in loss. So, and also I feel that emotional translation is almost impossible from 2 cultures, but that is debatable always. But here I have one request. I have one request to our Bipul Deori sir, to please, sir, share your experience as a translator, how you choose your books. As you are conducting this session, we may not have the opportunity to listen from you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Sometimes it's got very difficult in translating from one language to another language. When I translate the Immortals of Meluha and the Shiva trilogy, especially the Shiva trilogy, that whole backdrop of that story was the ancient one. But we don't find any equivalent words sometimes from English to Assamese. Like that, blouse, say, blouse is wearing by ladies and girls, but we don't have an equivalent words in that. When I started translating that Immortals of Meluha, I find it very difficult because I have to write. I also translated non-fiction and fiction in modern fiction, But at that time, I haven't find any problematic over there, any problem, because I can use those other, I can borrow some language from words from another modern words. But especially when I write, my target audience is Assamese, and I have to depict all these things from the past and the ancient past. So that time I have to go and I have to collect some very colloquial I bought it from the villages, then I put it in there in my literature. Say, foot, feet, there, how many feet, how many foot, how many inches. Those are all English words we are using in our text. But in my book, that Immortals of Meluha, it was a great hurdle for me to translate those particular words. So I went to villages, then what our villages people says, village folks like that, Sarihat Nol, Sarihat Dur, Ek Jujon, Ek Kruh Dur. I use those things. And about the Napoleon Bonaparte, translation of the Napoleon Bonaparte, all the phrases and idioms on those Assamese, he put all those things in the translation. So that translation all time best. People like it, because they love it, because they is very familiar with the language, the target languages. So that was a very wonderful translation by Satyam Borkotoki, and we also love that book. আৰু ইয়াতে ছাত্ৰ ছাত্ৰীসকলো বহুত আছে দেখিছোঁ আমাৰ ছাত্ৰ ছাত্ৰীসকলো আছে আমি কওক
Well, one observation and rather a question to all the writers. How do you confront with the personal element when you translate it? In Hamlet, frailty, thy name is woman. And if some feminist writer is translating, how would you overcome this word? As one of the person's politics, police, in most of the cases have been used as a negative remarks in India, in Indian perspective. Politics may not be always negative, may be a directive, good directive, what we call. And frailty, thy name is woman in Hamlet. And again in Mahabharata, Kunti has been cursed that you cannot hide anything. Say, if these two sentences are translated by a woman writer, maybe the feminist writer, where do you find your personal element there? That's my question. And have you confronted while translating the books? And another thing, I would like to add my observation, translation may not be the translation vocabulary to vocabulary. Maybe the content, many of the writers said that I didn't get the words. But basic thing is the content, what you wish to make the people understand from this writing, that can be replaced. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Pradipta?
Okay, so I think I might reply to that. Well, the first thing is that Kunti has actually already been translated by Sashi Deshpande. I was lucky enough to translate her story, and that is a feminist rereading of Kunti. So instead of maybe translating that bit, we can translate Sashi Deshpande's reading, or I'm sure there will be many other readings in all the Indian languages of the Mahabharata by feminist authors and by women authors who at least would be my first choice if I had to translate anything. I think that when we say that translation is political, what we mean, and I think that you also mentioned this, is that we have to be there and we have to be aware of who we are when we are translating. So the criticism that comes from feminist translation theory is not so much that you object to a sentence or to an idea in a text, but that you are aware of your position when you're translating. And that, the problem is that we've been reading translations by patriarchal translators all our lives without anybody telling us that they have been interpreting the text from those points of view. If we think about Sappho, for example, the lesbian writer, Greek writer, she has been translated as a heterosexual poet for many centuries into many of the Western languages. Nobody has told the reader that this is the perspective I am taking. So feminist and decolonial approaches to translation, what they're telling us is that we have to recognize that the translator is part of the process. And you have to be aware of who you are and from which perspective you're reading the text. That is what feminist translation is about. Not to hide things. These things have to be in the open. So from that perspective, we can have a translation that subverts the text as long as I say that I am doing it. So I can have a translation, and in theory they say that this is translating against the grain. If I, have a problem, an issue with the text, and this has been done with Latin American writers in the US, with the permission of the writer, actually. So it's not offensive after all. You can do it if you say it, and the reader knows that you're doing it. So I think that the feminist translation is not so much about having an issue. And then also we have the other side, which is translators have a lot of power. We have the power to suggest texts. And when I suggest a text, like you said, if I take a book to a publishing house in Galicia, it's because I believe that this book needs to be translated. Sometimes they ask me to translate books, for example, for children, because they don't want sexist content in the books. And many times when we're translating from English, for example, into Galician, you can have a book about professions, for example, in English, and all the professions are neutral. In Galician, most translations, I would add patriarchal, would use the masculine to describe each and every profession. So what I agreed with the publisher is we're going to use the feminine for all professions, because feminine is also the gender of person, of human being. So, and we explained it. And children are reading something that is a bit different, and the publishing house has requested me to translate that text, and I have many other examples, because they want, they want a book that does not contain a sexist translation of an original which was not sexist. So, so many aspects to this discussion. And as I said, we have a lot of power. I have created a project which is called Semente, actually seed in translation, by which I asked, I'm working with feminist texts from non-hegemonic languages, and we use an intermediate language, be it English or French or Spanish, but not to be read. That translation is not to be read. It is to be translated into other non-hegemonic languages. That is also feminist translation, getting the feminist knowledge around with a more diverse perspective, because otherwise, when they speak about international something, it's usually something in English, so that is not international by default.
Anyone there? Please.
Good afternoon, everyone present here. My name is Dipti Kuli, and I am from Parjat Academy Teachers Education Institution. My question is for Kalyan Bhuya, sir. My question is that can translation work ever fully capture the essence of the original work, or does it become a new story? For example, earlier I have noticed that you mentioned about the Alice in Wonderland, and it has been translated in many languages, like French and Spanish. Does Alice in Wonderland keep the same wordplay or encharm and translate it from English into other languages? What are your views, sir?
No, I did not speak about Alice in Wonderland, but I would like to add to the other question also. Two of the translations I have done are from feminist writers, particularly Smot Suktai, and
Sir,
also, I will come to your question. And also Gitanjali Sri, Red Samadhi is a feminist writer. And being a male, my biological gender, I think I had been very neutral to the text. I don't know, means what I think about it is because not being a part of the gender I am translating. So probably I could take a very neutral kind of perspective or neutral kind of view of what has been presented in the text. Coming back to your question, you see, in the last edition of this particular International Literature Festival, there was a discussion on Malayalam language and literature. Probably Anwar Ali, he has said that Malayalam has proliferated as a language in recent times because they can assimilate words from other languages also. And they have been a very proliferated language because of the translations that have been done in Malayalam language from the ancient times. So they are a very rich language in that sense. So translation can actually enrich your language, and that's why I have actually come into the field of translation. And I feel that translation is more difficult than the original work because you have boundaries. You cannot transgress the boundaries. So you have to be bound by the original writer. So it is a very difficult job as a translator to translate good literature. And I have been trying, if you ask my personal view, I have been trying to be as true as possible to the original texts. So, of course, my perspective will be there because what I will translate will be my understanding of the text. So you may understand the text in a different way. But yes, what you have said is there will be different perspectives of the same text. Two translations of the same original text cannot be same.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your answer. And it was my mistake. Thank you, sir.
Now, I want to read out a poem for you. And you will feel this is in Assamese, and you will feel it that it is written in Assamese. Actually, this was written by Walter Scott. That English poems has been translated into Assamese by one of our esteemed translator, Padmodhar Soliha, a long time ago. So I want to read out, and you feel that it is an original one like that. Sodek Prem. ধৰেনে জনম কেৱে এই মৰতত শিলাময় কৰি তাৰ হিয়া এ মোৰ জন্মভূমি বুলি মনে মনে এবাৰ জি নাই কোৱা নাইকিয়া আনৰ দেশৰ পৰা উলটি আহোঁতে ফুৰি চাকি ঘৰমুৱা হৈ জ্বলা নাই হিয়া যাৰ স্বদেশ প্ৰেমেৰে আছেনে কোনোবা এনে ঐ আছে যদি এনে কোনো কাটচিত চিনি থবা তাক ভালকৈ তাৰ বাবে গায়ক উচ্ছ্বাস উঠলি নুঠে তাৰ গান গাবলৈ থাকক থাকিলে তাৰ ডাঙৰ উপাধি জগতত ফটা ফুটা নাম থাকক থাকিলে তাৰ বিভূতি বৈভৱ বাখনাই ঢুকি পোৱা মান কিন্তু তেনে স্বাৰ্থপৰ দুৰ্কপলীয়া নাপাই খিয়াতি জনমত দুগুণ মৰণভোগী ধূলিৰ মানুহ মিলি যাব ধূলিৰ লগত তাৰ বাবে কেৱে আৰু নুটুকে চকলো কেৱে তাক নকৰে সন্মান কবিয়ে কবিতা ৰচি নকৰে কেতিয়াও তাৰ গুণগান This was an translated poem by Padmodhar Soliha. So with this, I want to wind up this session here. Thank you all panelists, and thank you all audience. Thank you.
As we have come to the end of today's session, I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to our esteemed panelists. Today's session have not only highlighted the significance of translation, it have also reinforced its role that connects as a bridge, that connects the culture, language, and perspectives across time and space. Thank you all. I would also like to extend my gratitude to all the participants, esteemed guests, student participants, for your patience hearing and participating in this session. I would like to extend my vote of thanks to the hall management team, the reception team, the technical support team, the rapporteurs for documenting the session, and everyone who made this session a successful one. Thank you all.
তললৈ আহোঁ বেলেগ মানুহ আহিব তললৈ আহি যাওঁ তললৈ আহা
Good afternoon, each and every one of this August gathering. We are about to start the last panel discussion of the festival on the topic, Reclaiming Narratives, Writing Back to the Empire. Writers from countries in Africa or roots therein reflect on how colonialism has shaped their oeuvres. I would like to request your presence and cooperation in this last panel discussion of the Dibrugarh University International Literature Festival 2025. Especially, our student participants are requested not to leave the hall and be with us for the concluding session of this 4 days festival. Thank you. A special announcement especially to our student participants. In 1 p.m., as the previous 3 days, today lunch is arranged at 2 p.m. only. Therefore, you are requested to be with us for the concluding session of the festival. After arrival of all the distinguished panelists, we will start the last session. Hello. Respected all, immediately after arrival of all the distinguished panelists, we will be starting the concluding session of the Dibrugarh University International Literature Festival 2025, which will be an engaging discussion on the topic Reclaiming Narratives, Writing Back to the Empire. Writers from countries in Africa and roots therein reflect on how colonialism has shaped their oeuvres. We will be listening to, in this panel session, to distinguished author Tete Michel Pomisi, Abdullah Shia, Joaquim Arena, Ernest Sifiu Mahala, Shabnam Khan, Raiz Neja Boneja. The session will be moderated by distinguished author and speaker Anne Morgan. So be with us for the concluding panel discussion of this festival. Thank you. Namaskar and good afternoon. All esteemed authors and literary enthusiasts, in these 4 days of the Dibrugarh University International Literature Festival 2025, we have shared with each other our ideas and opinions, our stories and narratives, listened to and reflected upon issues concerning diverse aspects of human existence. After completion of 48 panel discussions and 4 numbers of workshops, we are proceeding to the concluding panel session of this literature festival. In conformity with the focus area of this second edition of the festival, that is Africa, we are going to be a part of an engaging discussion on reclaiming narratives, writing back to the empire. Writers from countries in Africa or roots therein reflect on how colonialism has shaped their oeuvres. Respected all, may I be allowed to call upon the stage the distinguished panelists of the session. Kindly join me in inviting to the stage respected Tete Michel Pomesi, prolific writer, traveler, and storyteller, as a panelist of the session. Welcome, sir. I would like to request Abdullah Sila to take his seat on the stage. He is a distinguished writer and a multifaceted professional as well. May I take the privilege to call upon the stage Joaquim Arena, who is a Portuguese Cape Verdean author and journalist. Welcome, sir, Joaquim Arena. May I request gracious presence of Cameroonian novelist and poet Ernest on the stage. Kindly join me in inviting to the panel Sifiu Mahala, who is a South African writer, editor, and academician. Welcome, ma'am. Welcome, sir. Let's welcome to the stage Shabnam Khan, a South African author, novelist, and artist with Indian heritage. Welcome, ma'am, Shabnam Khan. May I be allowed to invite to the stage author, lecturer, and journalist Rais Neja Boneja. Welcome, sir, Rais Neja Boneja. This session will be moderated by Anne Morgan, a writer, speaker, and editor who gained attention of the literary world for her project to read a book from every country of earth. Welcome, ma'am, Anne Morgan. As over these 4 days, our authors have become familiar personalities to our audience and participants. Therefore, skipping further delayed introduction of them, we would like to allow more time for the conversation. So without doing much delay, may I request esteemed authors to begin their deliberations. Now the stage is over to you, ma'am, Anne Morgan, the moderator of the session. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that wonderful introduction, and to you all for being here and to this marvelous panel. It's a huge honor to be asked to moderate this session. I also have to confess it's a slightly uncomfortable thing for me. I come from a country that colonized many countries in the world, that was the head of the biggest empire. I grew up hearing that empire was a civilizing influence, that it railways to the world, that it shared cricket and fair play and was a jolly good thing. And I never heard about things like the Amritsar massacre and the Bengal famine and the torture of the Mau Mau. In fact, in 2015, Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, as it was then, tweeted congratulating all British taxpayers on finally paying off the debt of money that was paid to slave owners to liberate the plantations back in the 19th century. Unwittingly, all of us, British taxpayers, including those who were descendants of slaves, had been contributing to settling a debt that had paid off slave owners. It was only when I set out to read a book from every country that I started to hear other voices, and it's made me very aware that my voice really doesn't have much place in this debate. So I am going to leave the stage mostly to our speakers. The questions that I have are really from writers of the global majority, from quotes that they have given about empire, which I will invite the panelists to respond to, but I also want to let them take the topic in whatever direction they feel appropriate. But I thought maybe we could start reflecting on the title, Writing Back to Empire, which has come from Salman Rushdie, from an essay that he wrote and published in 1982, The Empire Writes Back with a Vengeance, which was obviously a play on the Star Wars film titles. Now, 1982 is more than 40 years ago, and I wondered whether the panelists feels that this is still an appropriate idea today, whether the empire still needs to write back. Is that even a useful way of thinking about this issue? Safiwa, would you like to start?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Anne. Can you hear me? Okay. First of all, I don't think we're still writing back. We've done the writing back. Right now, when we write, we are saying this is who we are. In other words, we are setting ourselves, our identity, and our identity really does not discard the fact that there is a legacy of colonialism in our fabric. For instance, one of the things that we've embraced is sport that came with the colonizer. Right now, both South Africa, where I come from, and India are better than England in cricket. South Africa is world champions of rugby. This is something we got from the colonizers, you know. So we took what the colonizer brought to us and perfected it and even beat them in their own game. So what is happening now, we assert ourselves. My approach in writing, therefore, I always take a historical approach. In other words, I was accused of becoming a literary historian. So whenever I put together, for instance, a collection of short stories, I like reflecting on either the pre-colonial period or the influence and the impact of colonialism in South Africa, and move on to contemporary times. So in a sense, when I write to say this is who we are, I reflect on the past to show how the past affects the present, because the past is always has a presence in the moment, so to speak, you know. So we don't shy away from that history of colonialism. We show it, how it affects us today. So the past is always present in my writing. Thanks.
Well, in my case, well, I speak and I write in Portuguese, me and Abdullah. But let's say in our case, in Portuguese language, we became independent later than most of the colonies, British or French colonies in Africa. This year, our country are celebrating the 50th anniversary of independence. But it took a long time, and we had 3 colonial wars. It was a traumatic process. And we started writing back in the 90s. So it's something we have around 30, 35 years writing back to the empire. So we're still doing, we're still in this process. And at the same time, there is something I call it myself, the empire of language, which means the language of the colonials. They still have this feeling that Portuguese belongs to Portugal, which is completely absurd. But we writers, not all, like I'm going to say again, Abdullah is an exception. He doesn't follow this path because he's a writer without going through Portuguese publishers. Isn't a rare example, case, but most of us, we kind of need to be published in Europe, in Portugal, in order to have a career or to be recognized as a writer. It's a process, because unless you're published in Portugal, even in our countries, you're not seen as a real writer. So this is the weight of the language on our shoulders. It's a kind of a process. It takes time, and I think we will come to a point or a moment where there might be a shift because of Brazil. Brazil is the biggest Portuguese-speaking country in the world, and Brazil is taking his place in this Portuguese or this Lusophone world. But little by little, we are achieving what you in English-speaking world or the French did long before us. So it's a process, and we still have to overcome some issues on it.
Thank you. Hello to everyone. I'm very thankful to the organizer for inviting me, inviting us, and for choosing Africa as the special guest in the second festival. This means a lot to us. Now, to your question, Anne, there is a lot we could say about it. And I do not want to repeat what I stated here yesterday, because one of the questions we should ask ourselves before, during, and after writing a book, be it a play, a novel, a short story, you name it. One of the questions I said is, who are we writing for? Why are we, first of all, writing? What is the meaning of our writing? It is not just entertainment. A book, a narrative, has several meanings, several values. In my opinion, since I write for Africans, I do not care. And as my friend Joaquin said, it happens seldom. I do not care about what the European reader thinks about my writing. Believe me. But I am very concerned about what my fellow Africans think about my writing, because I see this as the whole process as an ongoing dialogue, not among the contemporary citizens, contemporary African, but among us. And because our purpose, may it sound naive as it may, is to promote humanism. At the end, to make Africa the novel cradle of humanity. And by doing this, the sound way, we may not forget our past. But we, in my opinion, we should not allow ourselves to spend more time than required watching backwards. Let's focus on the future. Let's have our youth have hope so that they can believe in ourselves and find a way of building their future in our own countries instead of, letting themselves kill in the Mediterranean. This is, in my point of view, the highest value of every African, of the African culture, the African culture. Therefore, the writer has a special mission. Again, give a sense of a perspective of future. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks everybody. I always feel that I am nowhere at my place. From time to time, I'm invited by schools and or universities as they give me different titles. Some call me a glaciologue, some call me an ethnologue, some consider me as an anthropologist, and but I have never done any studies of those in those fields. I don't even before my journey, I have never heard the word ethnology before, so I didn't know what all those things were. But I started my book just by telling the story of my family, of my village, how my father, with his 8 wives and we, 26 children, were just living naturally according to our the rules of our traditions. Then, while we were colonized, the first effect of that colonization I felt was that we were prevented to go to school unless we are given a Christian name. My father had to look in a calendar and distribute names to us without baptism. My name was Tete, but at school they didn't want to hear that name Tete. So my culture was denied. I was called Tete home, and in the evening, Tete at home all the time. But as soon as I set foot in the school, I was Michel, no longer Tete. So in the village, I was Tete, and in the town, I was Michel. For a long time, I didn't know who I was. And I arrived in another country, a very far country, Greenland. I realized that I was not alone. They also are colonized, and their culture was set aside. And reflecting on all those, what we call colonialism or imperialism, etc., I think that we writers, or we, those who write, etc., must go back to our traditions, go back to our culture, and form. People think of Africa as soon as they hear the word imperialism, or think of, I don't know, Canada, or the Sami people who were all dominated. Yes, but I think that now we are awakened, and that we can form a kind of another imperialism, writing imperialism. Mahatma Gandhi fought with peaceful resistance. We can fight with writing resistance and also set up, how do I say, a human imperialism around the whole world. Yeah, thank you.
Hello, everyone. So to answer your question about writing back to the empire, I don't think we're writing back to the empire, but I do think there's a rewriting happening, which, for example, in my own book, I talk about I come from a community of Indian people who moved. I mean, Indian people have been in South Africa for 150 years now, and my grandfather would tell me about how he came from India to South Africa. And he would tell me stories of how he was in third class and the British were in the first class, and this journey of his mother would always look at the people in the first class and imagine how it was. And so in my own novel, I would write my Indian characters as the ones in first class. And in a way, for me, that's writing back. And so, or rewriting and reclaiming that power that you mentioned, Tete, of just reimagining. With fiction, you can reimagine the world without colonizers, or at least a different way of living. So for me, that was my way of it. And then this Indian family comes to South Africa and they have money. And this wasn't really, if historically speaking, this wouldn't have been correct. They would have come as third-class citizens. They would not, in coming into a world where apartheid was starting in South Africa, they would not have been able to buy land. And yet my characters build a huge mansion on a hill with many rooms and many animals, and they're considered very rich. And this is factually, historically incorrect. And yet, it gives me a great satisfaction to be able to give those characters that power and to make them live in this book, which is a way of I think, resisting. So, I think maybe not writing back, but like using fiction to rewrite histories is a way of resisting as well.
Thank you. Moi, j'écris pour que l'histoire de mes ancêtres ne s'efface pas.
I write because I don't want the story of my ancestors to disappear.
J'ai grandi dans une famille qui était déchirée par la colonisation.
I grew up in a family who was destroyed by colonization.
D'un côté, j'avais un arrière-grand-père paternel qui était militaire dans l'administration coloniale, et de l'autre, un autre grand-père qui était militaire dans l'administration locale.
I had a grandfather.
Great-grandfather.
Great-grandfather, two great-grandfathers. One was in the administration, in the colonial administration, in the military, the colonial administration, and the other one was in the local administration.
Et j'ai vu les conséquences que cela a eu dans les vies de leurs enfants.
And I've seen the consequences that they affect in the life of their children.
Et quand je grandissais, j'ai constaté que c'était l'histoire de plusieurs familles au Cameroun.
When I was growing up, I found out that that was the common story in Cameroon.
Aujourd'hui, la situation politique est vraiment chaotique. J'ai 30 ans aujourd'hui, mais rien n'a changé.
I'm 30 years old, and the situation is very chaotic. And after 30 years old, still nothing have changed.
Aujourd'hui, on a par exemple, depuis que je suis née, on a un seul président. Il est là depuis 40 ans et rien ne change. On ne veut même pas ouvrir les archives du colonialisme.
And I was born, we still have one president, and even the archives of Daniel is not yet to be revealed.
Et donc moi j'écris pour remettre en surface les richesses, les traditions des miens et à côté interroger l'histoire et me demander est-ce qu'il ne serait pas temps que à la jeunesse que nous sommes, que je suis, qu'on nous rende compte et qu'on nous dise la vérité.
So that's why I write to try to ask for
En fait, je me dis, est-ce qu'il ne serait pas temps, tant pour mon pays que pour les pays coloniaux qui colonisaient, de nous dire la vérité et de rendre compte à ma génération.
Yeah, I write because I want an account of what that has happened before to be revealed.
My generation.
To your generation, to my generation.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to repeat myself because everyone has spoken here is the same. So I don't want to repeat myself. I had what I will do. I will read what I prepared for this session. Just ink on paper, but a force, a revolution waiting to happen. Here, in this very space, we celebrate the boundless power of storytelling, the magic of poetry, and the way word shaped history, rebellion, and identity. Some say literature is an escape. I say it is an entrance into life, not our own, into histories we never lived, into future we have yet to imagine. If we think about it, the most subversive things a writer can do is tell the truth beautifully. Because once truth is out, once beauty is seen, we cannot unseen it. Let me ask you this.